No way we're crossing that field. That's not ground, it's a graveyard. One SEAL muttered, his voice tight with fear. The valley fell silent as SEAL Team 7 froze at the edge of 200 meters of open ground. It wasn't just dirt, it was a kill zone, wired with mines, hidden traps, and unseen eyes waiting to strike. No cover, no second chances. One wrong step meant instant silence. The commander's voice never came. Boots stayed rooted. Every breath was fear itself. And then, she moved. Rachel Hartmann, the quiet explosives specialist no one expected, stepped forward, alone. Each heartbeat could have been her last, yet she walked straight into the valley of death. What made her take that step? And how did she survive what others called suicide? The truth will be revealed behind her first step, something even the SEALs could never predict. When people first looked at Rachel Hartmann, they didn't see someone destined to walk into minefields or defuse bombs with seconds left on the clock. They saw a quiet woman with an engineering background, someone who could have taken a safe path, designing bridges, machines, or software. Yet Rachel chose the one path most people spend their lives avoiding, the one lined with explosives, uncertainty, and the certainty that one mistake meant she would never walk again. Rachel Hartmann was not born into danger. She grew up in a quiet Midwestern town, surrounded by the rhythms of normal life. Weekend sports, small-town traditions, the comfort of knowing almost everyone on her street. She excelled in school, particularly in mathematics and physics. Numbers spoke to her, and so did patterns, the unseen order beneath what others dismissed as chaos. For Rachel, equations were not just academic, they were puzzles waiting to be solved, clues about how the world worked. Her natural path, after finishing her engineering degree, was clear. Companies had already shown interest, offering her internships and safe careers in civil or mechanical engineering. But while her peers eagerly signed contracts for stable futures, Rachel hesitated. She felt an uncomfortable truth. Designing blueprints in air-conditioned offices would not silence the restless part of her spirit. There was something hollow about imagining a life where she stayed safe while others bled in wars far away. What drew Rachel toward explosive ordnance disposal was not thrill-seeking nor recklessness. It was responsibility. In her words, if I had the knowledge to keep soldiers alive, how could I sit behind a desk and do nothing? She knew that explosives were the silent killers of modern warfare. Mines and improvised explosive devices didn't discriminate between soldiers and civilians. They robbed children of legs, destroyed convoys, and shattered morale. Rachel didn't want to be a spectator. She wanted to be the one who stepped forward when everyone else froze. But make no mistake, choosing EOD was not glamorous. It meant years of grueling training, mastering both the science and psychology of explosives. She endured long days at the Navy's EOD school, working with live ordnance, studying how to recognize the faintest signs of danger. It wasn't enough to know how a bomb worked. She had to understand how bomb makers thought. Every wire placement, every pattern of disturbed soil, every shadow of camouflage revealed intent. Rachel trained her mind to read the enemy as much as the device itself. And here is where the paradox of people like Rachel Hartmann lies. The quiet ones, the specialists who never shout for attention, often end up in the deadliest roles. Society rarely celebrates them until their names surface in after-action reports or medals are pinned on uniforms. They are unseen until the moment of crisis. Personal reflection makes this even more haunting. Why would anyone willingly take such a path? For most of us, danger is something to escape, not embrace. Yet there are people, Rachel among them, who carry a conviction that safety is not their right alone. They believe their skills carry weight, and that weight demands sacrifice. To them, not stepping forward would be more unbearable than facing death. There is something profoundly moving about this. We often idolize the loud heroes, the ones who charge first, shouting commands or making headlines. But the quiet heroes like Rachel Hartmann remind us that true courage is not always loud. Sometimes it looks like silence, like the calm of a woman crouched over a live explosive, breathing steadily, refusing to let fear control her hands. Her choice to become an EOD specialist was also a rebellion against assumptions. Many doubted her early on. Commanders wondered if she had the physical stamina. Male colleagues whispered whether she could handle pressure. But Rachel never tried to prove them wrong with words. She let results speak. She dismantled devices no one else could figure out. She spotted patterns others missed. Over time, SEAL operators, men hardened by combat, realized she wasn't just the engineer attached to their unit. She was someone whose judgment could mean the difference between walking out of a mission or being carried out. And so when Rachel Hartmann walked with SEAL Team 7 into that Afghan valley, she wasn't just another soldier. She was the unseen specialist, the one whose life had been shaped not by a lust for danger, but by a quiet refusal to look away from it. In the end, Act Wanton is not about a single mission. It is about the making of someone who chose to carry a burden no one asked her to carry, someone who knew her skills could save others, and therefore she could never sit safely on the sidelines. This is why Rachel Hartmann matters. Because in a world where most of us chase safety, there are a few who step into the fire, not because they have to, but because they cannot imagine doing otherwise. And when the moment comes where everyone else hesitates, it is the unseen specialist who takes the first step. From the ridge overlooking the Helmand Valley, the ground below looked deceptively ordinary. Dry earth stretched across 200 meters of open space, broken only by patches of brittle grass and jagged rocks. To the untrained eye, it was just another barren Afghan field. But to Rachel Hartmann, every subtle variation in soil color, every unnatural mound, every patch of grass bent the wrong way screamed of danger. What lay before SEAL Team 7 was not terrain. It was a weapon, an intricately engineered trap that transformed land itself into an enemy. This was not the kind of minefield that belonged to old wars, where crude devices were buried hastily with little more than pressure plates and fertilizer-based explosives. No, this was something different, something terrifying. It was a carefully designed system of death created by insurgents who had learned, adapted, and mastered the art of modern engineering. The Taliban had moved far beyond improvised bombs hidden in soda cans or pressure cooker traps. What lay in that valley was a chessboard of destruction. Rachel could see the evolution immediately. Here were devices wired to command detonations, meaning hidden spotters could trigger them remotely with the push of a button. There, pressure plates buried just deep enough to avoid detection, but shallow enough to detonate under the weight of a boot. Further still, she noticed tripwires threaded through sparse bushes, camouflaged so perfectly that even a careful sweep might miss them. And these weren't placed randomly. They were layered, designed to funnel anyone crossing into predictable paths where multiple systems overlapped. One wrong choice didn't mean just one explosion, it meant a chain reaction. And that was the brilliance and the horror of it. The minefield wasn't just about killing whoever tried to cross. It was about stopping them from even trying. That is the subtlety of modern warfare. In earlier conflicts, a minefield was a tactical inconvenience, slow and brutal, but navigable with heavy equipment and enough time. But this was something else. The Taliban had studied American doctrine, understood how U.S. forces approached hostage rescues, and built their defenses specifically to break the rhythm of American speed and precision. The battlefield wasn't only about explosives. It was about psychology. Rachel knew that better than anyone. Mines were not merely mechanical devices. They were messages. Each one whispered into the minds of soldiers. You are being watched. You could die at any step. The ground itself betrays you. That kind of fear didn't just paralyze boots, it fractured morale. Soldiers could face bullets. They could shoot back. But how do you fight against the dirt beneath your feet? How do you fight something that doesn't move, doesn't shout, doesn't bleed? This is where war had shifted. The tools of destruction had evolved from crude barrels of homemade powder into military-grade sophistication. Many of these devices were built with factory precision, smuggled through black markets, or engineered by men with both technical degrees and years of battlefield experimentation. Rachel recognized techniques she had studied in classified courses, methods lifted straight from old Soviet manuals, refined with 21st century electronics. And here's the deeper truth. War is never static. Every countermeasure breeds a new weapon. Every solution sparks a more complex problem. Soldiers adapt, and so do insurgents. Yesterday's crude roadside bomb becomes today's networked minefield, and tomorrow, something even worse. But perhaps the most dangerous part of the minefield in Hellman was not the devices themselves. It was the illusion they created. Rachel noted that certain areas, those that looked most threatening, the kind of terrain any logical soldier would avoid, were often less dangerous than they appeared. Meanwhile, areas that seemed like possible safe routes were, in reality, the most heavily rigged. This was psychological warfare at its finest, making the enemy doubt their instincts, hesitate in their judgment, and eventually surrender without a fight. It's worth pausing here to reflect. In war, technology always advances, but psychology is eternal. What good is an army's strength if it hesitates to act? What good are weapons if the soldiers holding them are frozen by doubt? This is why modern minefields are not only weapons of destruction, but also weapons of perception. Rachel often described her role as part detective, part engineer, and part psychologist. She wasn't just defusing bombs, she was untangling the mindset of the people who planted them. Each device told a story of intention. Was the bomb maker trying to kill as many as possible, or merely slow them down? Was the trap designed to maim, to spread fear by showing its victims suffering? Or was it designed as bait, forcing rescuers to rush into even worse ambushes? As Rachel scanned the valley that day, she saw not just explosives but patterns of thought. And that is what separated her from the rest of the SEALs. Where others saw dirt, she saw fingerprints of human psychology mapped onto the earth itself. This is the hidden face of modern warfare, that even the most advanced weapons cannot compete with fear. A bullet wounds the body, but uncertainty corrodes the mind. And sometimes the most powerful weapon an enemy can wield is the doubt planted in your next step. For Rachel Hartmann, standing at the edge of that minefield, this truth was undeniable. The Taliban hadn't just laid explosives in the dirt, they had laid fear in the hearts of everyone who looked at that valley. The technology was terrifying, but the psychology, that was the real kill zone. The air on the ridge was tense, almost heavier than the heat itself. SEAL Team 7 crouched in silence, scanning the valley, waiting for a decision. The minutes were slipping away, and with every passing second, the lives of 6 hostages grew more fragile. All eyes turned toward Commander Nathaniel Briggs, a man forged in 2 decades of combat. Briggs was known for his decisiveness, for his ability to read a battlefield and act without hesitation. But now even he hesitated. The valley was a trap, and Briggs knew it. His training told him one thing: never cross open ground rigged with mines, especially when time was short and enemy spotters were likely watching. The standard doctrine was clear: either find another way or call for heavy engineering support. But they had neither the luxury of time nor the resources. It was Rachel Hartmann who broke the silence. "Commander," she said, her voice steady but respectful, "we don't have another way. That minefield isn't random. It's built on assumptions about how we'd approach it. If we read the pattern differently, we can cross it." Briggs turned, his sharp eyes locking onto her. He respected Rachel's skill, everyone did, but there was a line between listening to a specialist and entrusting lives to her theories. "Hartmann," he replied, his voice low but firm, "what you're suggesting is suicide. You're asking us to gamble with lives on something that isn't in any manual. My job is to bring these men home, not walk them into a grave." For a moment, silence pressed down again. The SEALs shifted uneasily. They knew Rachel wasn't reckless. She had proven her worth before, but this was different. Crossing 200 meters of engineered death was not a matter of cutting wires or disarming a single device. It was staking everything on one woman's rid of the ground. Rachel didn't flinch. "Sir, with respect, the manuals were written for conventional fields. This isn't conventional. They've laid traps where they expect us to go. That means somewhere in there are spaces they left weak, because they assumed no one would be crazy enough to step there. Those are the paths we need to find." Briggs's jaw tightened. "And if you're wrong, then I'll be the only casualty," Rachel said flatly. "Not the team, not the hostages, me." The weight of her words hung heavy. Some of the SEALs glanced at each other, their faces unreadable behind layers of grit and sweat. They knew the kind of courage it took to say something like that. And they also knew that courage could look a lot like madness. Here lay the crux of the conflict: rank versus expertise. Briggs had the authority, the responsibility, and the burden of command. He had to weigh the safety of his men against the urgency of the mission. Rachel had no rank to command anyone, no stripes that granted her authority. All she had was knowledge no one else in that valley possessed. This tension is as old as war itself. Authority and hierarchy are designed to create order, to prevent chaos in battle. But there are moments when knowledge, not rank, holds the key to survival. And in those moments, trust becomes the battlefield itself. Briggs exhaled slowly. "You want me to put this entire mission on your shoulders?" Rachel shook her head. "No, sir. I'm asking you to let me take the first step. If I fail, you'll know this path is impossible. But if I succeed, you'll know it's not suicide, it's strategy." The SEAL commander studied her for what felt like an eternity. Around them, the valley remained motionless, like the land itself was listening. He weighed not just her words, but her eyes, her composure, the calm certainty she carried. Soldiers learned to recognize bluff and bravado, and Rachel had neither. She carried conviction, the kind born not of arrogance, but of experience. And yet Briggs hesitated. Why? Because trust is hardest to give when it challenges the very structure of command. Handing over authority to a civilian-trained specialist, a woman without rank, went against every instinct drilled into him over years of war. If he said yes and she failed, he would bear the guilt of ordering men to follow her. If he said no and time ran out, the hostages would die, and that would be on him too. This is the paradox of leadership. Authority means responsibility, but sometimes survival demands humility. The humility to recognize when someone else knows better. Finally, Briggs spoke. "Hartmann, you'd better be right, because if you're wrong, this team is over before it even begins." Rachel met his gaze without blinking. "Sir, I don't need to be right about everything. I just need to be right about this one step." That answer silenced the debate. Briggs gave a curt nod. "Move." The moment was small, almost quiet, but it was revolutionary in its own way. It wasn't just a commander giving permission. It was a shift of trust, a recognition that knowledge could overrule hierarchy when lives were on the line. And here lies the insight worth remembering. In the military, trust is often tied to rank, but true trust is forged in the crucible of competence. Sometimes the bravest decision a leader can make is to step back and let the unseen specialist step forward. The world seemed to narrow to silence. Even the wind, which had carried dust across the valley all morning, slowed into a breathless pause. SEAL Team 7 remained crouched behind the ridge, their weapons ready, their eyes fixed on the open ground. No one spoke. No one dared to move. And then Rachel Hartmann adjusted the strap of her pack, inhaled slowly, and stepped forward. The crunch of her boot against the dry soil was almost deafening. Every soldier behind her instinctively held their breath, waiting for the explosion that never came. Dust rose around her ankles, swirling in the sun, as if the valley itself were waking to her presence. She crouched low, scanning the ground with eyes trained by years of experience. Rachel didn't walk blindly. She read the earth like a book. The first patch of soil told her a story. It was uneven, disturbed in ways that natural erosion wouldn't create. To most, it was nothing but dirt. To Rachel, it was a warning, a likely placement for pressure mines. She veered slightly left, tracing the edge of an area where tufts of grass grew irregularly. Grass was often a clue. Where roots had been cut to bury a device, regrowth was uneven, fragile, not aligned with the natural spread of the field. A faint gust of wind brushed across her face, carrying dust that revealed subtle depressions in the ground. She studied them with precision, each indentation a clue. Some depressions were shallow, designed to lure soldiers into thinking they were harmless. Others were carefully disguised pits with devices below. Her eyes darted between the soil and the ridges ahead, knowing that unseen watchers could trigger command-detonated devices if she strayed into predictable paths. Step by step, she advanced, her rifle hung at her side, not because she didn't expect danger, but because she knew her weapon was useless here. Her battlefield wasn't fought with bullets. It was fought with attention, patience, and an iron will against fear. Behind her, the SEALs remained frozen. Commander Briggs clenched his jaw, every instinct screaming to call her back. But he held. He knew this was her world now. They were warriors, but she was the one who could navigate a battlefield made of dirt and shadows. At 50 meters in, Rachel paused. She knelt, brushing the surface lightly with her glove. There it was, a nearly invisible strand of wire stretched across the ground, disguised by dust and the shadows of dry weeds. A tripwire, the kind that wouldn't just kill the one who triggered it, but set off a cascade of explosives around them. She traced its direction, spotting the mound that hid the charge. Instead of marking it with tools, she adjusted her route, guiding herself toward what looked like open exposure, an area the Taliban engineers assumed no one would dare to use. That was the key. Courage wasn't about ignoring fear. It was about understanding it, and then using knowledge to navigate through it. From the outside, Rachel's movement looked reckless, even suicidal. But in truth, each decision was grounded in logic, built from years of recognizing patterns. Where others saw risk, she saw calculations. Where others froze, she adapted. Here lies an important reflection. Courage is often misunderstood. Many think it means charging into danger without hesitation, like the heroes in stories who never falter. But that is not courage. That is recklessness. Real courage looks like Rachel Hartmann in that valley, acknowledging the fear, feeling the weight of it with every heartbeat, yet moving forward anyway because the mission demanded it. Courage is not the absence of fear, it is mastery of it. Rachel's heart pounded. Each beat echoed like a drum in her chest. Each one could have been her last. Yet her breathing remained steady, her steps deliberate. She moved with the calm precision of someone who understood that panic kills faster than explosives. At 75 meters, the trap grew subtler. The terrain flattened into what seemed like harmless ground. But Rachel knew better. She had studied enough enemy tactics to recognize the deception. This was the psychological trap zone, the area where engineers assumed soldiers would relax, believing they had passed the worst of it. That was where the deadliest devices were placed. She slowed further, eyes flicking to faint glimmers of metal half buried beneath dust. A command-detonated device. She shifted course again, zigzagging across the open field. To an observer on the ridge, it looked as if she was weaving randomly, but to Rachel, every movement was intentional, each one a counter to the logic of the men who had laid the field. By the time she reached the 100-meter mark, sweat poured down her face, stinging her eyes. Her legs ached, her lungs burned, but she kept moving. Behind her, the SEALs hadn't spoken a word. Even Briggs, the seasoned commander, found himself holding his breath with every step she took. He realized something profound. Authority had its place, but in this moment, survival belonged to expertise. And here is the lesson. Knowledge transforms fear. To the untrained, that valley was death itself. To Rachel, it was a puzzle. Deadly, yes, but solvable. The difference between courage and recklessness was that she did not step forward blindly. She stepped forward because she knew something the rest did not. When she finally reached the halfway point, she paused, lifting her radio just enough to whisper, "The path is here. Follow my steps exactly." The SEALs exchanged glances, hearts pounding. For the first time in the mission, they realized something they would carry with them forever. Rachel Hartmann wasn't just their EOD specialist. She was their path through hell. Rachel Hartmann's voice crackled softly through the radio. "The path is here. Follow my steps exactly." For a moment, no one moved. The SEALs looked to Commander Briggs, and even he hesitated. But then he gave the nod. One by one, the men rose from cover, rifles at the ready, and fixed their eyes on Rachel's footprints etched into the dust. She had marked no flags, placed no sensors. The only guide through the minefield was her own trail. Each step chosen with precision, each turn calculated against the enemy's intentions. It was, in every sense, a path of knowledge. The first SEAL stepped forward, carefully matching his boot to the exact impression Rachel had left. Then another followed. Soon the line formed, a silent procession of warriors threading through what had been declared impassable ground. The tension was unbearable. Every crunch of gravel, every shift of soil felt like it carried the weight of death. Yet step after step, the field remained silent. Rachel continued forward, scanning the ground, even as the team closed the distance behind her. At one point, she motioned sharply to the left. A faint glimmer had caught her eye, buried wire almost invisible to anyone else. Adjusting, she altered her path, weaving the team around what would have been certain destruction. Her calm movements radiated confidence, and slowly, the SEALs began to believe not just in the path, but in the woman who had drawn it. By the time the unit reached the far side of the field, the impossible had been accomplished. 200 meters of engineered death lay behind them, and not a single casualty had been taken. Briggs exhaled for what felt like the first time in hours. "Hartmann," he whispered, "you just rewrote the rule book." But there was no time to celebrate. Ahead lay the compound where the hostages were held. The valley had been the first trial. Now came the storm. The SEALs fanned out, executing with the precision they were known for. Breach charges, flashbangs, controlled bursts of gunfire. The assault was swift, calculated, and overwhelming. Rachel remained just outside the main breach, covering with her rifle. She was not the one pulling hostages out of locked rooms or neutralizing armed guards. But make no mistake, the rescue belonged to her. Without her first step, none of them would have reached this compound alive. Minutes later, the hostages, 4 doctors and 2 nurses, were led into the night air, shaken but alive. Relief swept through the SEALs as they secured the perimeter. In that moment, Rachel allowed herself the faintest smile. She had done more than cross a minefield. She had proved that knowledge, courage, and intuition could outmatch fear and engineering. What Rachel Hartmann achieved was more than tactical brilliance. It was proof of human innovation. Every breakthrough begins with someone daring to challenge the impossible. The Wright brothers turned flight from madness into mathematics. Scientists cured diseases once thought incurable. And here one woman saw a minefield not as death, but as a puzzle to be solved. Creativity never starts with consensus. It starts with defiance. Rachel's step into the kill zone was not reckless. It was the spark of a method others would later study and follow. The SEALs could move because she went first. The hostages lived because she risked what no one else would. That night, as helicopters carried the team and rescued doctors away, Rachel sat in silence. Her victory was quiet yet profound. Courage guided by knowledge can redraw the map of what is possible. Sometimes salvation comes not from firepower, but from one person daring to take the first step. When the dust of the mission finally settled, the official reports painted Rachel Hartmann's actions in glowing terms. Commander Briggs himself submitted the recommendation for her to receive the Bronze Star with Valor, a medal reserved for those who show extraordinary heroism in combat. To Briggs, the recognition wasn't just deserved, it was essential. He knew that without Rachel's courage and insight, the team would never have made it across the valley, and 6 innocent lives would have been lost. But beyond the medal, something even more enduring took root. In after-action reviews, analysts began referring to Rachel's approach as the Hartmann Method. It wasn't a new tool or a fancy piece of equipment, it was a way of thinking, a framework for understanding minefields not only as physical obstacles, but as psychological weapons. Her method taught specialists to read patterns, to decode intent, and to trust that knowledge and discipline could outmatch even the deadliest traps. Within months, military training schools were dissecting her steps, turning her singular act of bravery into a doctrine for future EOD teams. And yet Rachel herself never claimed heroism. To her, stepping forward wasn't about medals or recognition, it was about duty, the belief that if she had the knowledge to make a difference, then she had the responsibility to act. That distinction matters, because too often we define heroes by rank, power, or the ability to command. But Rachel's story proves that true heroism can emerge from quiet specialists, the ones who rarely seek the spotlight, but who step into danger when no one else will. This is the reflection her story leaves behind. Perhaps we need to redefine what it means to be a hero. A hero is not always the loudest voice, the one charging into battle with weapons raised. Sometimes a hero is the person who studies silently, prepares patiently, and then acts decisively when the moment of truth arrives. Courage, after all, is not the absence of fear. It is the mastery of it. That mission in Helmand Province changed more than the fate of 6 hostages. It changed how her team, and later the military at large, viewed the role of expertise in war. It proved that innovation often comes from those who dare to think differently, and that leadership is not just about rank, but about recognizing wisdom wherever it comes from. As the helicopter blades thundered that night, lifting Rachel, the SEALs, and the rescued hostages into the sky, she sat in silence. Around her, men spoke of victory, relief, and survival. For Rachel, the victory was quieter but no less profound. She had shown that sometimes survival depends not on overwhelming firepower, but on knowledge, courage, and the willingness to take a step no one else would. Sometimes the most dangerous path is the only one that saves lives. Rachel Hartmann's story is not just about war, it's about life and the choices that define us. In her world, every step could have meant death. In ours, the steps may not be so extreme, but they still carry weight. Think about the moments when you've stood frozen, at the edge of a new career, a difficult conversation, or a personal risk you weren't sure you could take. Just like Rachel, many of us face minefields in everyday life. The fear of failure, the doubt of others, the uncertainty of the unknown. Her courage reminds us that innovation and progress don't come from waiting for perfect safety. They come from moving forward when it feels impossible. That message resonates deeply with American culture today, especially for older generations who have lived through moments of uncertainty, whether it was war, economic hardship, or personal loss. The lesson is clear. Courage isn't recklessness. It's the quiet strength to act when others hesitate. Now, I'd like to leave you with a few questions. What first step in your own life have you been afraid to take? Do you believe true heroism is only found on the battlefield? Or can it be found in small, unseen acts of courage we take every day? And perhaps the hardest question of all, when fear stands in the way, how do we know if it's warning us to stop or daring us to begin? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments below. If this story moved you, please give it a like. Subscribe for more stories like this, and share it with someone who needs encouragement today. Thank you for listening. And remember, sometimes the bravest step is simply the next one.